Asics has been really hitting it out of the park this year with their product announcements. Back in May, they did their big event where they invited a bunch of influencers and media to try out the new Metaspeed Tokyo series, the Sky, the Edge, and the Ray. That was a big event, it was a big deal, sort of their first big thing of 2025 to celebrate the World Championships in Tokyo in September. Yesterday, they did an announcement where they actually announced a new colorway, color set pack for a lot of their shoes that also celebrates the city of Tokyo in preparation for the World Championships coming up in September there. But in yesterday's announcement, we actually got two new Blast level shoes. These are two shoes that we've been seeing in leaks for well over a year now, and it's interesting to see that they actually came out what we've seen in leaks for really that past year. Nothing's really changed in these two shoes. And I think they're going to make many runners very happy. However, they do create a lot of questions in the Asics lineup. This video is not a review. I don't actually have either one of these shoes. I'm not part of the Asics family, so I'm not seeded with shoes pre-release from them, but I am working from a primary source here. I've had a chat ongoing with someone who has been testing various versions of both of these shoes for many months now. And in that chat, we've talked a lot about how these two shoes have evolved, how they've changed, and they've answered a lot of the questions I had about these two shoes. Because I've been very curious where Asics is going to take the Blast series, and with the addition of these two new shoes, we get a lot of good information about where they seem to be headed with the series. And here they are. The first shoe is the Asics Sonicblast, and the next one is the Asics Megablast. And looking at the specs of these two shoes, from a stack height standpoint, they're actually fairly similar. The Sonicblast is 1 mil taller, but you're not going to feel that. The drop is 8 mil in both of them, and I've been told that the drop feels like a true 8 mil drop in both of these shoes, even though the way the midsoles feel are extremely different. And getting to the midsoles, the Sonicblast is actually the more complicated shoe. It's a top layer of FF Turbo Squared, a new ATPU training variant of FF Turbo foam that's part of this launch of both of these shoes, with a 3/4 length Pebax plate, which Asics is calling their Astro plate, and then a lower layer of FF Blast Max foam, the same foam that you find in the Nova Blast under that. So it's that multi-foam plated setup. The other key piece of information is that plate is a 3/4 length plate. It's not a full length plate. It's really a 4-foot loaded plate with a lot of toe rockers. So there's a very aggressive 4-foot rocker and toe spring in the Sonicblast. Where the Megablast is really just a simple shoe. It's one big chunk of that new FF Turbo Squared ATPU midsole, and it has a fairly aggressive 4-foot rocker, though I've been told it's not quite as aggressive feeling as the Sonicblast. Looking at the outsole dimension, the Sonicblast is the narrower shoe. There's been a lot of care paid to making that shoe speed-oriented and much more nimble. And you can see that from the forefoot and the midfoot, though the heel is very similar as far as width, giving you similar stability. And the Megablast, as you can see, is the wider of the two, bringing in some stability, and it's on par with both the Nova Blast and the Superblast. I think something that a lot of runners are going to not like about either one of these two shoes, you can clearly see here with the outsole. It's got that typical Blast outsole where there's just not a lot of rubber coverage and a ton of exposed foam. Now, I think Asics does this to make sure that the shoes have a very compliant ground feel. The Blast series shoes, the Nova Blast, the Super Blast, have always felt very soft underfoot. If you've ever run in a shoe that has a rubberized foam outsole, no rubber on the outsole, that's what the Blast shoes have always felt to me, very compliant to the ground in that way. But Asics has always put a little rubber on there to give them some protection, and that's always been a bit of a pain point for a lot of runners with both these two shoes. The Megablast is intended to be a kind of high volume daily trainer. It will be interesting to see how much that outsole actually wears and stands up to a lot of use. And the Sonicblast, having more rubber on it, is the shoe that's intended for more speed work, speed sessions. It's an interesting choice here that Asics has made with both of these outsoles. Starting with the Sonicblast, this I think is the less interesting shoe personally to me. It's been described, and really it's always been talked about, as a plated Nova Blast. That's a shoe that I've just never wanted, but I know a lot of runners actually have wanted that shoe, and it seems like Asics has really delivered on that. What I am hearing about the Sonicblast is it's kind of a combination of two other Asics shoes. On one end, you have the Magic Speed 4 specifically, that sort of stiffness or plated feel. Even though the Astro plate is a PVEX plate, it's much softer and more flexible in the Sonicblast. And on the other side of that, you have the Evo Ride Speed, which is that very rockered, very rolling feel off the toe. And I've been told that the Sonicblast is sort of a direct comparison between those two shoes. And in some ways, that's actually quite interesting because Asics has always had shoes with a lot of rocker as far as the Evo Ride series. They've always been trying to make that work. The Evo Ride series has always kind of been on the periphery of what Asics is doing as far as their mainline running shoes. And it's interesting that they brought a lot of that thinking into the Sonicblast. And as far as the Magic Speed 4 saw a big change from the Magic Speed 3. I thought the Magic Speed 3 was a brilliant shoe. Didn't really think much of the Magic Speed 4, but it's interesting positioning-wise where the Sonicblast actually is going to sit now in the lineup. It's definitely a trainer. I've been told that the engineered mesh upper is fitting very similar to how the Magic Speed 4 actually fits. In fact, the uppers are very similar in that way. It's a lower volume fit, a little bit more performance oriented, which makes sense because the Sonicblast is intended for speed sessions, speed work, or faster running in general. So given that the Sonicblast is a combination directly of the Magic Speed and the Evo Ride Speed series, it will be interesting to see where both those shoes go. I hope to see the Magic Speed go back to kind of what the Magic Speed 3 was. Again, I love that shoe. And as far as the future of the Evo Ride Speed, we'll see where that goes. Currently, it's on sale on asics.com in many markets. So either there's a new update coming or the Sonicblast really is the replacement for the Evo Ride Speed. Overall, I'm not very interested in the Sonicblast. I don't think I'll be covering it actually on this channel besides this video. It's just not the type of shoe that I run in. And frankly, it feels like a very Asics shoe right now. It's a couple years too late. This idea of plated super trainers was the thing 2 or 3 years ago. And if this shoe would have come out 2 or 3 years ago, it would have really, I think, changed the marketplace. But now in 2025, we're seeing a lot of other types of shoes. Again, I know some people will enjoy this shoe and I think they'll find exactly what they want, but it's just not a shoe that I think I'll be running in at all. One other thing I want to say about the Sonicblast, and another reason I'm not that interested in it, is the 3/4 length plate. Asics keeps going back to these 4-foot loaded or 3/4 length plates. We've recently also seen that in the Metaspeed Ray, which is one of the reasons I'm not really interested in that shoe at this point. Asics has been continually trying to make this plate work, and every shoe that I've run in with a 3/4 length plate or a 4-foot loaded plate has always felt disjointed. Even though I am a 4-foot striker, it always feels strange. The 4-foot and the heel feel completely disconnected from each other, and I've never really enjoyed that feeling. But again, Asics is really trying to make that tech work. I don't think it's a weight savings thing. They found some sort of performance thing that they think works better. Maybe they're smoothing it out because it is a trainer and not a racer. Because as I've also talked about on this channel, the Metaspeeds, which are their race shoe, tend to be very stiff and they can be very harsh to train in, though I actually prefer them for that purpose. But it seems like they really are trying to make a true plated trainer that has more trainer in it than plated shoe. So that's why they're using that 3/4 length plate. But again, I'm really not a fan of that style of plate. But moving to the Megablast, this is a shoe that I'm interested in. And what I'm actually hearing about this shoe is that it's very much like the original Superblast, the Superblast 1, where it has that responsiveness. Some of that responsiveness that the Superblast 2 might have lost when it went to FF Turbo Plus foam, which is just a little bit softer. Though the Megablast is a softer, bouncier shoe. In fact, that's how Asics is really talking about both the Sonicblast and especially the Megablast, is that it's their bounciest shoe that they've made yet. And they're really leaning into that. The person I've been talking to that's been testing this shoe said that they've tried a couple different versions of this shoe that have different firmnesses of foam, and the one that they've landed on as far as the release candidate is by far the most enjoyable. And again, it's got that sort of responsiveness and poppiness of the Superblast 1, but it's just a lighter and bouncier shoe overall. I've also been told that the upper on that shoe is very similar to what's on the Superblast 1. Maybe not quite as paper thin and delicate feeling, but it's definitely more like the Superblast 1 upper than, say, the upper that's on the Sonicblast, which is more like a Magic Speed upper in general. So again, it really feels like Asics is tuning the Megablast to be that all-around long distance speed shoe, and really leaning into the idea of what a lot of runners were using the Superblast for as a max cushion daily trainer. Because remember, and I've talked a lot about this on this channel, the Superblast was never intended to be a daily trainer from Asics. It was meant to be a long run trainer. And in fact, the language they used to describe the Superblast, even the Superblast 2 and the upcoming Superblast 3, is very much a long run trainer. Marathoners who need a non-plated option for those long runs that have some pace in them. That's exactly what the use case was for the Superblast. It seems like with the Megablast, they're leaning into how a lot of runners were using the Superblast and making a true all-around max cushion responsive daily trainer that you can do all your long runs, all your daily runs. If you're a runner who likes a max cushion shoe, that's going to be the sweet spot for you. But also if you're training and you need that non-plated long distance trainer that you can do pace in, the Megablast will also be your shoe. The real story with the Megablast and partly the Sonicblast is the foam, that FF Turbo Squared foam. It's a new ATPU training foam specifically. Same chemistry as FF Leap, the new foam that's in the Metaspeeds in both the Sky Edge and the Ray, but it's again tuned specifically for training. But it's got all of the benefits of an ATPU foam. It's the bouncier, lighter, more dynamic ride that a lot of ATPU foams have been giving a lot of runners. And I think that's the real story with these shoes. Now, when you look at the Megablast and the Superblast 2 being the current Superblast in market, it's hard to distinguish between the two shoes. I think from a ride profile standpoint, the Megablast is going to be the softer and bouncier shoe, where the Superblast 2 is going to be the more kind of rolling direct shoe because it is that firmer shoe. But as we look ahead till next March when the Superblast 3 will be coming out, the Superblast 3 is actually moving to FF Leap foam with a thin layer of FF Blast Max below that. And that's going to make that shoe much bouncier, much more dynamic. So again, it's going to be interesting to see how these two shoes are positioned and how runners adopt both of these. I do think that the Superblast is a shoe that's more tailored specifically to training. And again, that's the shoe that's directly going into the Metaspeeds because it's using the same foam as the technology in that shoe, where the Megablast will be that all-around trainer that you can use and put in a lot of miles. Though again, with the outsole on that shoe, it'll be interesting to see how durable that actually turns out to be. The thing about the foams, the new FF Turbo Squared foam, is that ATPU foams from Asics and other brands, mainly Puma, who's been using them a lot with their Nitro foams, ATPU foams have turned out to be quite durable. So from a foam standpoint, if these shoes are durable, they should work really well. I'll just be curious how well those outsoles hold up over time for runners. I will say that the Megablast is a shoe that I'm interested in covering, and it is a shoe that I plan on running in because I'm very curious about how that compares to the Superblast, but I'm also very curious how that shoe is going to compare to a shoe that I'm currently testing, the Nike Vomero Plus. I think it's really positioned to be somewhere between both the Vomero Plus and the Superblast, and expect some versus videos coming with all three of those shoes, maybe a few others. And looking across all four of the Blast shoes at the end of summer 2025, this is where we are currently. The Nova Blast 5 is the daily trainer with an energized bounce. And I'm using Asics' marketing language here very specifically to talk about each one of these shoes. It's the lowest stack, and it's the one that's meant for just general all-around running. The Sonicblast is a little bit taller, but again, it's got that 3/4 length Pebax or Astro plate in it. It's around the same weight as the Nova Blast, and it's specifically that speed-focused daily trainer that maximizes forward propulsion. Again, specifically Asics' marketing language. The Superblast 2 gets into the higher stack heights that we've known for 2 generations now of the Superblast, and specifically that's the long distance trainer with supercharged cushioning. Again, it's got their race foam in that shoe. It's meant for training, specifically for race training, not just daily training. And then you have the Megablast, which has the new FF Turbo Squared foam, which is the same stack as the Superblast, a little bit lighter. In fact, the actual weight of the shoes people are testing are even lighter than the spec from Asics, around 10 grams lighter in some cases. And that's the Ultra Bounce with the most energetic cushioning yet. Again, playing off of how they described FF Leap foam and really leaning into their new ATPU foams. The addition of these two new Blast shoes to the Asics running lineup doesn't really close any gaps in the overall lineup. In fact, it just creates a little bit more confusion because they've already had shoes in both of these categories already. In fact, they have a couple options for both these categories. But what it does do is create a end-to-end Blast series now, which I think is something that Asics has really been working on to provide like a full-service Blast lineup that's their kind of new approach to training. So you can go from training to speed training to long run or easy run or recovery running in a Blast shoe, plug in a Metaspeed, and you're good to go with all your training and your racing. It feels like Asics has been really trying to get there, and with the addition of these two shoes, it feels like as far as a full end-to-end Blast series, they finally have. Thank you for making it to the end of the video. If you want to support what I do here, check out sagasurunning.com for merch or click the join button below. If neither one of those options are good for you, leave a comment, leave a like, because it helps this channel continue to grow, which I always appreciate. And with that, I'll catch you in the next one.